Observing a classroom from the point of view of the administrator and not from the perspective of the teacher is a little different. It allows you to sit back and pay closer attention to the lesson and not be so focused on your own thinking and your own expected reactions of the students to what you are teaching. I had a checklist of things that I was watching for and responses that I was expecting from Mr. Tolliver and that I was also expecting from the students. Students were highly engaged and they were understanding the lesson, but I thought the pacing was a little bit slow. For me, pacing is a very important part of a lesson. If it's too fast, then the kids don't have time for discussion. The wait time isn't long enough usually for students, and often you find that kids are rushing through the process. The same applies to if it is too slow. If it's too slow, the kids start to wander with their own thinking. They lose the perspective of what the teacher is asking for from the students, and you just find a lot of wasted time. Mr. Tolliver did a really good job pacing this lesson, so it made it more interesting for me. From the point of view of an administrator, though, I have to keep in mind that pacing is a very difficult thing. We often get caught off guard by student questions, or we get misled by a lack of understanding where there isn't one. Some of the things I was looking for were for an introduction to the lesson. I was also looking for how well Mr. Tulliver tied the lesson into the lesson that we had taught the day before. I also was looking for Mr. Tulliver to check for understanding as he went, which he did a really good job. As an administrator, again, from that point of view, I was caught off guard by how much I got caught up in what the students were doing and what the students were learning and the discussions that they were having. And I stopped watching the teaching. I stopped looking for my checklist. And then I could see where it would make it very difficult to later on come back and write a report or give feedback to a teacher if you weren't paying attention to their teaching and the pacing of their lesson and the components of the lesson. One thing that I found myself doing was I started looking at the classroom setup itself. As I got more comfortable with the lesson and putting myself in the the role of the administrator, I had an easier time looking around the classroom, looking at how he had laid out the classroom. The kids are clustered in small groups, so it does make for easy discussion. It does make for a nice way for them to work together. But he also allowed the kids to grab a clipboard or a dry erase board, and after he paired them off by ability grouping, or also he had paired them by ELL learners and non-ELL learners, and had paired them boys to girls and girls to boys. He did look at the pairing of the students. I thought that was really good on his part. But what I was going to say was that although the classroom was set up so that the students could naturally work together in small groups, it was nice to see that Mr. Dolliver allowed them to move kind of around the room, making for a more private communication of what they were doing among the students. The ELL learners, I noticed, had an easier time with sharing their ideas or asking questions because it was in a more intimate type setting or situation. I also noticed that Mr. Dolliver did a very good job of walking around the room, questioning the students, asking for clarification. From an administrative point of view, that's a good thing because you want him to be just as involved in what the kids are doing as they are. And that prompting and that individual attention helps to lead or focus their learning as well, and to check for understanding. The classroom is well laid out. It's laid out in a way that it makes it easy for the teacher to walk around the room. I noticed that from an administrator's perspective, I look at that when I am looking at a classroom layout. If it's difficult for a teacher to move around the classroom, they're going to be less likely to be moving around, especially if they're engaged in teaching. it also makes it difficult for the students to move around the classroom. So I do, as an administrator, I was looking to see for, were there materials that were easily accessible to students, such as manipulatives, dry erase boards, dry erase markers, clipboards, ways for the kids to be able to move around the room and interact naturally and easily, and it not have to be such a forced part of the classroom management. As an administrator, again, I was watching Mr. Tolliver to see how he dealt with certain behavior issues, certain classroom management, interruptions, such as needing to go to the restroom. At one point, a couple of the children had commented that they didn't have to work together. And I had been watching this interaction, and Mr. Tolliver took that as that they were avoiding working or didn't want to be working together. It was more that they didn't really understand the assignment. They weren't understanding multiplication as a modeled into groups. And so because they weren't understanding that, it was hard for them to apply the word problems that they were working on and to show those models. So it wasn't that they weren't wanting to work together, it was more that they needed somebody that was matched to them better. He did come back and check in with those students. I was happy to see. And he rematched them with some other students that were evenly matched and maybe too well evenly matched. So it provided both students with more structure that they were needing. I was very happy to see that he did a closing with the lesson. He checked for understanding. The way that he did this is he had some of the students come up to the whiteboard and model what they had done on their own, and asked for feedback from the class on how they had done. He also looked for understanding or assessed how well the lesson had gone by using sticky notes that the students modeled one last word problem on and posted in the classroom before they left the classroom. Overall, watching the lesson from the administrator's point of view reminds me how difficult it is to be a teacher and how difficult it is to keep a pace of a lesson going well and keep children engaged. It also reminded me that I have to work on engaging myself as an administrator on watching the teacher and not the kids, because I am used to being from the point of view of being very engaged with what the students are thinking and what the students are producing and what the students are offering, and I need to be more engaged in what the teacher is doing, how the teacher is presenting the lesson, so that I can give that feedback and necessary feedback when I leave their room.